This is Brad Keithley, Managing Director of Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Welcome to the weekly top three, the top three things on our mind here at Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets for the week of March 16th, 2026. The weekly top three is a regular segment on The Michael Dukes Show. The show broadcasts on both Facebook Live and YouTube Live, as well as via streaming audio from the show's website, weekdays from 6 to 8 a.m. I join Michael weekly in the first hour of Tuesday's show from 6:10 to 7 a.m. for a discussion between the two of us about our three issues. We post the podcast of our discussion following the show on the Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets Facebook, YouTube, SoundCloud, Spotify, and Substack pages, also on the Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets website, as well as the project's page on national blog site, medium.com. You can find past episodes of the weekly top three also at the same locations. Keep in mind that in addition to these podcasts, during the week, you can also follow and participate in the discussion with us of these and other issues affecting Alaska's fiscal and economic condition by following us on the Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets Facebook page and through our posts on Twitter. This week, our top three issues are these. First, we discuss the ongoing debate over the funding source for the FY26 Supplemental. Second, we explain how, yet again, the House majority has demonstrated it doesn't know what the term fiscally responsible means. And third, we discuss the issues involved in the competing LNG import projects. And now, let's join Michael.
There's just so many crazy things going on in the legislature. This whole schooling thing with Yunt and Tobin, we're going to get into later, but that, man, I just don't even know how to unpack that at this moment. But you've got some topics to get us started for the week. Let's start over the debate for the supplement. This thing is still going on. I mean, this was a fast track supplemental, right? And they were going to do it, and then they were going to, we're out of money. Oh, we're not out of money, but we don't know what to do. And all of a sudden, the majority paints themselves as the fiscally conservative ones who are trying to be good about it and everything. It's hilarious, but also not at the same time. Give us the details here.
Well, the substance of it is that the legislature fast-tracked a supplemental in part in response to the contractor industry that is concerned about having funding for the state match of federal funds on roads issue to fund road repair. And so the legislature fast-tracked this supplemental. They started the fast track at a time before the start of the Iran conflict, at a time when oil prices were down. The House passed a fairly major bill, about $500 million, if I recall correctly, in terms of a supplemental, one of the biggest supplementals we've seen. Went over to the Senate. The Senate pared it down to about $370 million, I think it is now, which they reduced some pieces of it, which was good to reduce spending down. But the Senate also did a Burt trick in rewriting the bill, and that is they funded the entire supplemental from the CBR, sort of regardless of what oil prices were and oil revenues were. They came in with full funding from the CBR, full CBR draw to fund it, which would have likely sort of made sense before the Iraq conflict. But with the Iraq conflict and with the spike in oil prices, there came to be a real question about whether that the CBR draw is necessary, whether there's going to be adequate revenues from normal revenue sources, including oil, to fund the supplemental. So this Burt trick of putting the full $370 some odd million in as funding became a problem when it came back over to the House, and the impact of the Iran conflict, of the Iraq conflict, the Iran conflict, and seeing the impact on oil prices became much more real. And all of a sudden, over on the House side, some very sharp people on the House side, I want to give credit to the House minority, some very sharp people saw the potential for this. The potential that the Senate had added this $377 odd million. The Iraq conflict or the Iran conflict was going to explode oil revenues so that the that the supplemental was no longer so that the CBR draw was no longer necessary. But the $370 million were going to sit there. It was going to sit there as sort of what they sometimes call a headroom, like a headroom draw. It's going to be money that was available, sort of regardless from the CBR, sort of regardless of what happened with the oil revenue side.
Right, a slush fund, as otherwise known as a slush fund.
Right, and so the House minority rebelled against that and said, we don't think that we don't want to create this slush fund. And the House majority has responded to that with some very humorous quotes. But it's that I'll get to in just a second. But I think the House minority has done a very good service to the state of preventing the CBR draw as it got constructed in the Senate, as Burt and Lyman constructed it in the Senate. I think the House minority has done a very good job of preventing that CBR draw from sort of setting out there. Now, the Senate majority, the Senate and the House majority would say, oh, don't worry about that, because if we don't need that money at the end, if by the end of the legislative year we don't need that money, the excess will spill back into the CBR. Well, the minority's response to that, a very good response, is, yeah, well, that's as long as you don't tag on additional spending through additional bills. The thing about the CBR draw is it takes a 3/4 vote. The thing about once you've appropriated the CBR, once you've had that 3/4 vote and the CBR is in the revenue pot, it just takes a majority to pass more spending. The governor potentially could veto it. There's all sorts of additional fail-safes there, but I think the House minority is doing a good job protecting the CBR from being used as sort of a slush fund, as you put it, going forward. The humorous quotes, they've come from the majority, and one in particular from Calvin Schrage that I flagged. This is from the ADN article on this dispute. But the revenue forecast that Republicans are banking on is not realized money, said Calvin Schrage, an Anchorage Independent who co-chairs the Finance Committee. The minority, he said, was suggesting today that we rely on a forecast, unrealized, unpredictable, uncertain money to finance a budget when industry and Alaskans are asking for certainty. What the heck does he think that the legislature does every year?
I know.
By relying on oil projections. I mean, we've talked about this on the show before, but by relying on oil projections for a substantial part of the revenue base. I mean, every year the legislature is relying on a forecast, unrealized, unpredictable, uncertain money to finance the budget. So it's really sort of humorous to see the majority sort of reduced to arguing about the uncertainty of the money when they themselves rely on that uncertain, unpredictable, unrealized money when they craft together the annual budget.
Every year they rely on it. So, I mean, I want to dumb it down just a little bit just for myself, because what you're saying is the majorities are pushing hard for the CBR draw because the thought is the backhanded maneuver here is we can approve the CBR draw for this bill, and then if we end up paying for the bill out of the over the over-realized gains from the Iran war, then we can use that money for something else. Essentially, it gives them a $373 million fund to do something else with, so they could still pay for it out of the unrealized gains, but still have access to the $373 million in the CBR to spend on something completely arbitrary. That's the problem.
Yeah, and so the Senate majority and the House majority would say, "Oh, that's not our intent. Our intent is simply to have this one time to pass the CBR, to have it as a backup if oil prices don't achieve the projections, the current projections, to have it as a backup, so it's there to be drawn upon to pay for this stuff. But it also could be used to pay for other stuff if other stuff got included in a subsequent bill, in the big appropriations bill, for example, and they went back and did some stuff for FY26 in the big appropriations bill. So I think the House minority has done a very good job picking up on the consequence of what Burt did. I mean, Burt has sort of a benign explanation of, we just want to make sure the money's there regardless of whether these oil revenues come in but that benign the legislature is often all about tricks, right? And that benign explanation, while it sounds good on the surface, once you dig into it and see how they structured the CBR draw to come into the revenue pot and only to go back out later if other revenues show up or if it's not appropriated out. Once you see how it's structured that way, I think the House minority did a very good job picking up on that trick.
Yeah. And again, you could see the frustration. Even Zach Fields was quoted on Andrew Gray's podcast as calling the minority terrorists, which I had to laugh at because that was exactly the words that I used the first time that Bert tried some of these maneuvers on the Senate side, especially when he was shutting down the road construction on things like the Kinikus Bay Road and others. Projects that were already in process, and he was threatening to shut them down if he didn't get them to vote his way. But yeah, I mean, this is already, you could see the frustration, and good on the minority for finding this. And again, going back to the whole point of the administration and the DOT has already said, we don't need this fast track. We could already pay for this. Just make sure it's included in the regular budget. We're covered. We're good. But somebody wanted to make some hay here, and I think they saw an opportunity to wheedle a little more money out and pull some money out of the CBR in the process.
Yeah, well, whether that was the intent or not, that's been the effect of the way the language came back from the Senate, and I as I say, I really appreciate the House minority finding that. I mean, all of this is happening on a very quick track. Not only is the supplemental moving on a fast track, but the consequences of the Iran war and its impact on oil prices is moving on a very fast track. It was not apparent at all that we were set up for this at the time that the supplemental originally went through the House. And it was starting to become apparent, but not fully apparent at the time that it was in the Senate. As oil prices have sort of exploded over the last week, or 10 days or so, as the war has become more intense and the Strait of Hormuz has come into play, as prices have risen quickly, and the futures market is saying that they're going to stay there for a while, at least through the end of this fiscal year. We're only talking about three more months. As prices have risen, it's this issue has come up about why do we need the CBR draw if we're going to have all this revenue from oil? And so I credit to the House minority for picking up on that in such a dynamic situation where things are very fluid and moving very quickly.
Yeah. Brad, at some point, I mean, I'm just watching this back and forth. They make it sound like the majority makes it sound like that they are trying to be the fiscal conservatives, that they're trying to be fiscally responsible. And the thing is, we just know. I mean, we just know how they're going to be. And when you see the shenanigans and this kind of underpinnings, you realize this is all an end run to try and soak a little bit more money out of the thing to be able to bolster the budget again.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't start out that way. I mean, let's be fair to them. It didn't start out that way because at that time oil prices were down, and so you weren't seeing this spike on the traditional revenue side that could take care of the problem. They wanted to do the supplemental, and the supplemental passed the House. It passed it with minority support the first time through, and they needed the CBR draw at that point because there wasn't a projection of revenues coming in on the traditional side. And on the Senate, you can sort of excuse the Senate because Iraq hadn't become fully formed in terms of its impact on oil prices.
Iran,
Iran. But by the end, I'm one more late.
You're one more back.
But by the end of the time they were handling it, you could start to see this coming. And I will, because it's so easy to do and so convenient to do, and we do it so often, I will blame Bert for the way he packaged the CBR revenue coming in as sort of ooh, look at this neat trick I can do. I could just throw all this money in sort of regardless. So you sort of give a pass to the House the first time through. You sort of halfway give a pass to the Senate because it's still not fully formed.
Well,
but when it comes back, you can truly see this going on.
Right.
And the House majority's resistance on making an amendment or sending it to conference, sending the bill to conference in a way that would strip out the CBR draw or reduce the CBR draw down to a fairly minimal amount. The House majority's resistance to that makes you really begin to wonder if the purpose of this isn't to have that additional money,
right,
that they can budget this cycle.
I think it started out as a political stunt, right? Because again, the money was there. The DOT had said it. The administration said, no problem. We can still get the match, et cetera, et cetera. But there was so much falderall going on over it. I'm sure that many people are like, this is an election issue. We could say that we saved the federal match. I think that's what it started out as. And then when the Iran war broke out, they saw it as an opportunity to get their grubby little hands on more money out of the CVR, which they really want. We're back. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. We're into the weekly top three. Number 2 of the weekly top 3. The House majority, again, demonstrates that it really doesn't know. I mean, I keep using that word fiscal conservative, but they really don't know what fiscally responsible means. What are you talking about, Brad?
So they wrote an opinion piece, and it's signed by all the members of the House bipartisan House Majority Coalition. An opinion piece in the ADN, the title of which is A Fiscally Responsible Approach to Supporting Great Schools. And it goes through and it lists all of the additional spending they need, starting with Chuck Kopp's favorite, the defined benefits plan, and passing the return to a defined benefits plan for Alaska and the Alaska education industry, and then going on to talk about additional bills, sort of ending up talking about, and we need more money in the classrooms too, by the way. So we need to have more money, more funding coming to the classrooms. We need to inflation proof or inflation adjust the amount of the BSA as it goes to the classroom, so we don't start losing money as a result of inflation in the classrooms, which you wouldn't, but that's their argument. And so it goes through all of these spends, and says, this is what would make Alaska schools great. The headline promises a fiscally responsible approach to supporting great schools, but all they've really got in there are spending. They've got a little bit of revenues. The bill that would apply the digital tax, extend the sales tax to, or extend the corporate income tax to companies operating in the state digitally. They've got a little bit of revenue in there, but it's not near enough to pay off all of the spending that they list in this article. But they try to play like it does. I mean, that's the only revenue they add, or that's the only revenue they talk about, and they use the title of fiscally responsible approach. So they try to play that this revenue that they're talking, this little bit of revenue that they're talking about, balances out all of the spending, but it doesn't. I mean, I'm not sure how many times you can call out somebody for something. I'm going to try to set the record on it, I guess. When somebody writes an op-ed saying, spend, but they don't include a balance of pay, how they're going to pay for it, and who is going to pay for it, who's going to bear the burden of that additional spending. I mean, this is one in a long series that we've seen over the last several years. We need to spend more on this. We need to spend more on that. We need to spend more on the other thing, but without any recognition that they have to pay for it, and there has to come revenues. I suppose if you pressed Kopp and others on how this is fiscally responsible, they would say, well, we're going to cover the spending through additional PFD cuts, because there's still PFD money out there that we haven't spent yet. It's like burning a hole in their pocket, right?
$685 million that we could spend so many great things on.
And so we're going to be fiscally responsible by just taking it out of the pockets, by taxing middle and lower income Alaska families. That's why we're fiscally responsible, because we still got that pot of money sitting out there. And parenthetically, and they want to trust us on the CBR, right? They want to have that money in the CBR, but no, they're not going to spend it. But the money sits in the PFD and they spend that. So they would argue that they're fiscally responsible because there's still unspent PFD money out there. But it's not. I mean, when you write one of these articles, when you write one of these commentaries, particularly when you headline it with a fiscally responsible approach to whatever, You need to talk both about the spending side and the revenue side, and where those revenues are going to come from and who those revenues are going to impact. That's fiscally responsible. That's pay as you go. That's balance. That's balancing the budget in a balanced approach by having revenues, by talking about revenues and where you're going to get those revenues from at the same time as you're talking about spending. And the House majority doesn't do it here. They haven't done it before. I mean, in all fairness, there's members of the House minority, Julie Colon, who talks about the need for childcare, additional spending on childcare and tax credits for childcare and all that sort of stuff. And she doesn't talk about where the revenues come from either. So it's not purely one side, but this just stands out because it's signed by all the members of the House majority. It leads with a headline that says fiscally responsible approach.
Right.
And yet it fails to achieve that.
Well, what I found interesting is how cagey they got in it. They start talking about teacher retention and everything else, and that means that they passed the House Finance Committee HB 78, a shared risk retirement plan. That's what they call it. And it goes through the whole thing. They don't call it defined benefits because they know the stigma surrounding defined benefits, but that's the new verbiage is a shared risk retirement plan. And then they go on to talk about as you talked about earlier, HB 280, which again applies the income tax on digital sales. And of course, nowhere in here do they remind you that there is no dedicated money. So any money that comes in off this goes into the general fund, but they're making it feel like this is all about propping up brick and mortar schools. This money will go straight to the schools, which again is untrue because all the money is general fund money in the end. But these are the games that they play, Brad. This is what they do.
Yeah, and Michael, to some degree, the press falls for this. This is on the Binkley family blog. This is on the ADN op-ed page. And to some degree, the press falls for this and lets them get away with it. They let them get away with it in press conferences when they talk about being fiscally responsible. And it's, we've got a press that doesn't, to use the term, doesn't press very hard
right
on the arguments that legislators are raising. They view their job more as just repeating those arguments. Both the majority and the minority. I will say that there's a fair number of quotes in the article on the supplemental budget from the minority explaining their position, and so I can't fault them that much. But you get stuff like this headline that says fiscally responsible, and the ADN reserves the right certainly to change headlines on op-ed pieces. They've done it on mine. They've done it on others, and you could say an approach. You could rewrite this headline to say an approach to supporting great schools, as opposed to a fiscally responsible approach. But they nonetheless let that verbiage go ahead and go. But so it's a multi-part problem. It's in part we have legislators who aren't honest, who aren't transparent, who use words. Going back to our Orwellian argument that we've talked about on the show a lot of times.
Right.
They're
right.
Orwellianizing these terms into meanings that they don't commonly mean. I mean, they're used fiscally responsible commonly means balanced, but that's not what it means in the context of this argument. So they're using words for different meanings, for political meanings, and the press is letting them more or less have a free ride in how they're doing it.
Right. Well, it's frustrating to watch, but you can see, again, this gives you a peek behind the scenes as to what they're thinking, what they're focusing on. The whole sorry, I'm having a hard time reading this line. Our caucus organized around fiscal responsibility, supporting a public education and reforming our retirement system. Those things are also dichotomous. I don't know how you can slap them all together in one sentence. But the fact that the people that got us to this position of fiscal crisis now claiming that they're organized around fiscal responsibility, I mean, they're selling it. That's all I guess they're doing. They're selling it. That's what's happening.
What's really somewhat humorous about this is they would explain, Calvin Schrage and others would explain that they're fiscally responsible because they have balanced budgets, and they have balanced budgets because they cut the PFD to whatever level it needs to be to balance the budget. They essentially tax the PFD, tax middle and lower income Alaska families, to create enough revenue to balance the budget at whatever level of spending they decide. That's their term of fiscal responsibility. And then they say, oh, and we're going to be fiscally responsible because we're going to take these revenues and we're going to designate them for education and spend it only on education. And so it's a good thing we're spending it on good things. But they don't give the same respect to an existing statute that was followed for decades up until the mid 20 teens. They don't give respect to a statute that says we designate these funds that they're now cutting.
Right.
We designate these funds for the permanent fund dividend. So it's all wordplay. It's all Orwellianism that we fall into in Juneau.
Final thoughts on number 2, Brad, as we get ready to wrap up here. The fiscally responsible coalition in the legislature, of course, is the majorities. They'll tell you that at a drop of a hat, but the proof is in the pudding at this point, right?
Yeah, I should, and I probably will at some point in one of the landmine columns talk about using the term fiscal responsibility and what it means. Before it's Orwellianized, what it means. It means balancing spending with revenues, and if you propose new spending, you need to propose new revenues to pay for that spending. And that's, we need to use terms in the manner in which they're intended, as opposed to Orwellianizing these terms and using them and saying, oh, it means this now. It means we can ignore the statute we don't like, and use funds out of that statute in order to support a statute we do like, and designate funds under that statute. We need to sort of call this stuff out wherever it occurs.
Ben Carpenter, the former legislator, host of Oversight Live, said, yesterday in the morning, DOR said we have more oil money. Yesterday in the afternoon, OMB said we spent it on the operating budget. Even sent supplemental requests after the statutory deadline. This legislature is a joke. They're making up the rules as they go along, right, Brad? They just, like you said, they can't even acknowledge or follow the statute that we had to begin with. Only when it's convenient do we now it's a statute, we've got to do it. It's this is where we're at, right?
Yeah, exactly right. So if I'm interpreting what Ben's saying, that the administration is submitting additional supplemental requests after the deadline on top of the supplemental requests it's already had in, then it's the administration that's participating in this problem as well, by saying, "Oh, we got more money now. We got the CBR in the general fund, so now we just we got some more supplemental requests to take care of." It's at some point you got to stop. At some point you got to say, "Look, if you want more spending, fine, justify the additional spending, but come up with the revenues for the additional spending." Stop the drain on the PFD. Respect statutes. I remember Josh Revak, when Revak was a senator. I had a conversation with him early on about the PFD, and he said his defense of supporting PFD cuts was, well, if they thought the PFD was so important, why didn't they put it in the Constitution? And my response was, well, because they thought you would respect statutes, because they thought you would follow the law.
They thought statutory was enough. Because that's the law, but no.
And his response was, well, it's not in the Constitution, so we don't have to do it. Well, okay. So you're saying that the legislature, can just willy-nilly violate the law? You can just apply these terms that we don't have to follow the law with respect to appropriations, but we do have to follow the law. It is important to set up this education fund, and we're going to designate funds to it, and we're going to follow the law on that. It's just, it's the Orwellianization. It's the lack of consistency, the lack of transparency, the lack of respect for statutes, for things written in the law, that just really frustrates you, and makes the legislature and the administration, when they engage in it, make them appear untrustworthy.
Right. Well, I mean, since it is St. Patty's Day, I can invoke the whole phrase of the Irish democracy, right? Because when you get a legislature that just starts passing laws that don't matter or just ignore the laws on their own willy-nilly, it reduces the respect of all for the rule of law. And they have the ability to change it. They have the ability to change the law. Instead, they leave the dueling statutes on the books because it behooves them to create that kind of chaos.
And they aren't even dueling statutes. I mean, I once spent I've spent more than one column in the landmine as a lawyer digging into the statutes. They don't conflict. They didn't when they passed that statute, the POMV statute in 2018. They didn't describe that they were creating a conflict. They were describing it as a consistent step on top of the existing statutory framework.
Yeah.
And they don't conflict. I mean, what they say in very stark terms is the PFD will come out of the POMV draw, and the PFD will be calculated the way it's always been calculated. That statute's still on the books, and come out of the POMV draw. There's not a conflict. It's only a conflict when the legislature wants to spend a whole bunch of money and doesn't have the money to pay for it, and all of a sudden an Orwellianization occurs. Oh, there's a conflict in this statute between various provisions of it. Wasn't there when they created it, but all of a sudden got there when they wanted the money, when they didn't want to pass new revenue bills and they wanted money to pay for additional spending.
Yeah. Well, and we often, I remember back in the day, we thought that Wielechowski was the hero for stepping up and trying to fight this in court. And then we realized later on that he understood the situation better than we did. And it was a way to lock in the legislature's ability to basically raid the permanent fund dividend. That's what it was about in the long run. So it's crazy, but here we are. Brad Keithley joins us. The weekly top three continues on to number 3 of this. This is a wowzer kind of week. The competing LNG import projects. Now, Brad, we talked about this earlier before this ever came about. We were like, what are these utilities doing? What is going on? What's happening back and forth here? Why is this? And then Chugach Electric pulled out of the consortium of utilities and said, you guys are crazy. We need to just do something, right? I mean, because that's how it felt. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but that's what it felt like. It felt like you guys are sitting around with your thumbs up your bums. We're going to go do something because we're going to run out of gas. And now we've got competing projects. Let's walk through this.
So we've talked about this before on the show, the import LNG projects, the facilities, the projects that would build facilities or have facilities for the importation of LNG into the South Central. And Chugach is differently situated than some of the other utilities, particularly NSTAR, because Chugach's contract with Hillcorp runs out before the NSTAR contract runs out. And Hillcorp has said it's not going to extend or not going to renew any of those contracts. So Chugach is facing a gas shortage, a shortage under existing contracts earlier than NSTAR is. So Chugach has been motivated to get out in front of this issue. And one of the reasons they broke out of the consortium is the consortium didn't seem to have the same incentives or the same motivation to solve this problem in the near term. The net result is we've ended up with two projects. One is the conversion of the old Kenai LNG plant, the LNG plant that was built by ConocoPhillips back in the day, or Phillips actually back in the day, to export excess gas that was being produced from the Cook Inlet, export that to Japan, and that facility continues to exist. And what Hillcorp has done is Phillips had it, then they sold it to Marathon. Phillips kept it in, ConocoPhillips kept it in, maintained it and kept it in condition that it can be brought back into service. Then Marathon, who owns the refinery next door to the LNG plant, bought the facility with the thought that they would import LNG in order to supply gas to the refinery that the refinery uses for fuel. But Marathon never stepped up, and Marathon got the permits from the FERC and others to do that conversion, to convert it from an export project to an import project, essentially turn it around. But Marathon never did that. And so as the Cook Inlet issue has developed, the Cook Inlet gas shortage issue has developed, Hilcorp has come in and bought the facility from Marathon, and is in the process and got the permits that Marathon had gotten to convert the facility, and is in the process of converting the facility, and has entered into contracts with Chugach to supply Chugach from that facility. Separately, NSTAR, who also has a Cook Inlet gas problem, separately, NSTAR has also landed on the fact that we're going to need imported LNG in order to solve South Central's needs, at least in the near term. And NSTAR went down the road of having negotiations with various providers. At one time, they were going to have a floating LNG plant up in Matsu, or up by the port, the Matsu port, but that sort of fell through, and other projects have fallen through. And ultimately, NSTAR landed on this sort of joint venture with Glenfarne to build a grassroots, a new LNG importation facility in Kenai on the Cook Inlet, with the thought that that facility could be turned around at some point if the big line was built and we entered into contracts, export contracts for LNG, Alaska LNG to the Far East, that facility could be turned around and turned into an export facility at some point. So they've been working with Glenfarne, but the net result is that you got a relatively small market. The Cook Inlet is a relatively small market, LNG or gas consumption market, and you got two competing facilities that are costly,
right?
Trying to import a relatively small amount of LNG, at least to start, and each proposing Chugach through the purchase from Hilcorp, and NSTAR with his project with Glenfarne, each proposing to essentially bill the cost of those facilities through to customers. And the RCA, quite rightfully, has raised the issue about, wait, do we really need to be doing this? Do we really need to be burdening consumers with two sets of LNG import facilities?
Right. Well, especially since the NSTAR project is going to be built, its joint venture would be built on the backs of ratepayers more than anything else. I mean, and Chugach, that's more with Hilcorp. Hilcorp is shouldering most of the burden on that. So, I mean, either one, again, you've got ratepayers that are going to be paying for a lot of this stuff out of the thing. They're the ones that are going to feel the pain on this.
Exactly right. And Chugach, I mean, Hilcorp's going to build Chugach, and Chugach is going to build those costs through to ratepayers. So it's not that ratepayers avoid the problems with one by going with one facility with the Chugach facility, because Chugach is, or with the Hilcorp facility, because Hilcorp's going to be billing those costs through. Excuse me, getting to me. NSTAR has raised one point that I think is a particularly good point, and I don't think is getting addressed in all this. One of NSTAR's points is, look, Hilcorp has a monopoly, essentially a monopoly position, dominant position at least, in the Cook Inlet gas market now. And look what they've done to us. They've not developed additional supplies. They've not extended their contracts. At one point, you'll recall a couple of years ago when the legislature was considering tax reform for the Hilcorp loophole on corporate income taxes, Hilcorp threatened to not invest in the Cook Inlet anymore as a way of manipulating the legislature on the corporate tax issue. So, because of their dominant position, they had the power to do that. And so NSTAR is raising the issue. Look, we've had enough of Hilcorp's dominance and the effect it's had on us. So the fact that Hilcorp is going to be, extend that dominance by having the LNG facility, we don't really want to be part of that, because we've been the tail on the dog that Hilcorp's wagged or the past decade and a half. And that's actually a very good point. I mean, Hilcorp's not been the world's greatest actor,
right.
In this situation. You can say, well, it wasn't economic to go develop additional supplies. That may be true, but that thing with the legislature they did a couple of years ago has really stung me in terms of what they're willing to do with their dominance in the Cook Inlet. So I think NSTAR raises a good point. What that should lead to, though, is instead of building a whole new plant with Glenfarne that will become a white elephant, frankly, if the big line is never built, which it likely won't be, and so we'll have this big LNG plant that is brand spanking new with all the brand spanking new costs of it. Rather than NSTAR focus on this new plant, we ought to be focusing on Hilcorp's dominance and how we deal with that dominance. And there are ways to do it. I wrote a column a few months ago, or a few years ago, maybe a couple of years ago, that talked about the dominance that Hilcorp would have as a result of acquiring the LNG facility from Marathon, and ways to deal with it, requiring that facility, for example, be an open access facility. That is, that anybody could buy LNG, a tanker load of LNG, and bring it to the facility and toll it, pay for the cost of regasifying it, but not have Hilcorp be the dominant seller out of that facility. I think that's where the RCA and others should focus their attention: how to reduce or how to mitigate Hilcorp's dominance in having the Kenai LNG facility. I think the Kenai LNG facility, frankly, it's an existing facility. You don't have to rebuild it. It is scalable. You can build additional facilities on top of it for additional demand. I think that makes the most sense in terms of efficiency and cost effectiveness of having an LNG import facility, not having this new build out there with Glenfarne. But you've got to address the issue of Hilcorp dominance and what that means for the Cook Inlet long term before you really can say, okay, this is the solution to go with the Kenai LNG plant.
Yeah, having that sole source contractor out there providing gas in the inlet or providing an inlet for imported gas could spell a challenge for trouble. What we got about a minute left here. What do you think the RCA is going to do now that they're taking these questions and asking these hard questions? What do you think is going to happen?
I think they're going to take some time with it. Unfortunately, the commissioner who knows the most about this, Bob Pickett, has rotated off. He served since Sarah Palin was governor. He was a Sarah Palin appointment, and he's known the most about this issue over the years, understood it the best. He's rotated off. So we've got a little bit of a green RCA dealing with the issue. But I think, as I say, I think that they ought to be focused on the Hilcorp dominance issue and addressing that and dealing with that as they come to grips with the situation.
Quite honestly, I don't understand this appears to be like bickering siblings between Chugach Electric and NSTAR, why they couldn't come together and come together with one plan instead of creating this kerfluffle for both of their ratepayers. That's what kind of blows my mind at this point.
Well, NSTAR, I think there's two things motivating NSTAR. They want the big line because that's Alaska gas, and John Sims has made clear that's what he would prefer. They want the big line, and the grassroots LNG import facility is a little bit of a pre-build to the big line. It's a little bit of let's get this started by building the LNG facilities that can then be turned around to export facilities, and it sort of helps in a way, particularly if they can get their ratepayers to subsidize it. It helps in a way, sort of getting a bit of the kit for the LNG export project underway, and that's sort of been one of John's themes. And the other one is I think NSTAR truly believes that they've been stung by Hilcorp dominance, and wants to find a way to get away from that dominance, and having their own LNG import facility that's not owned and controlled by Hilcorp is the way to do it. And I place a lot of weight on that. I think that's a valid concern. But I don't think that justifies building a grassroots, expensive we hope we get the cost down because we'll have the big line, but maybe it won't happen. We'll have to bear all those costs. I don't think it justifies building a whole new facility. I think instead what it justifies is dealing with the Hilcorp dominance issue that's been created by Hillcorp acquiring the Marathon LNG facility. And there's, some will argue, oh, well, we can't do that because of federal law. Federal law creates exclusivity by the FERC over the Hillcorp facility and LNG import facility. My response to that is, and I've dealt with this with a lot of years. I dealt with this when I was in practice. My response to that is that that's supposed to deal with the physical activities of importation. It's not supposed to deal with the economic activities related to importation as they relate, particularly where those volumes are not going to go in interstate commerce, but are just going to stay in intrastate commerce. There's a specific exclusion in the Natural Gas Act that carves out state regulatory jurisdiction over facilities built for intrastate commerce. So I think there are ways to deal with this. It's going to take an RCA that understands the issue and is aggressive in dealing with the issue and aggressive to standing up with Hillcorp. Maybe that means an administration behind them that's aggressive in doing that. But I think that's the right way to attack this issue, as opposed to letting competing facilities and two sets of costs being built out there.
Well, I mean, at least they're taking a look at it at this point. I mean, I guess I will give the RCA credit for that. At least they're taking a look at this. The question is, what will they actually do with it? Once that they've got that in their corner. I mean, do they basically just tell Chugach, sorry, you can't do it? Or do they tell NSTAR, sorry, can't do it? And then where does that leave the other party?
Yeah, I would say they ought to include Hillcorp. They ought to open the docket on Hillcorp. There's a problem also. The legislature hasn't clearly passed enabling authority for the RCA to regulate the Hillcorp facility, the LNG import facility, the economic aspects of the import facility. And so the RCA would likely say, oh, the legislature hasn't authorized us to do that. It's just, I mean, this is one of those situations where I can see a path to a solution. And the solution is to deal with the Hillcorp dominance issue and then use the Kenai LNG facility. You can see a path to that solution, but everybody's just sort of, tiptoeing around the perimeter of it and not taking the steps necessary to enable the RCA to do that, or to push the RCA to do that. So we may be stuck in this for a year. I hope to heck the RCA doesn't authorize each of them to start flowing through costs from their own separate facility.
Yeah,
that would. I mean, talk about economic burdens on South Central. That would increase the economic burdens on South Central.
Yeah, it's a pretty significant lift. I mean, we're talking about facilities that cost $250 million, right? I mean, these are not cheap facilities to build, especially the NSTAR one being a full facility versus a rebuild. But I mean, it's a significant amount of money that would all go to the ratepayers in the long run.
Yeah. I think there's a path to success, but the path to success requires dealing with the Hillcorp dominance issue. I mean, I'm concerned about Chugach and the Hillcorp dominance issue. What's Chugach going to do if Hillcorp says, oh, the cost is $15 an MCF when the world price is 10? What's Hillcorp going to do? What's Chugach going to do when Hillcorp says it's $15 an MCF? They've linked themselves. I mean, there's not any other suppliers out there they can go to, because Hillcorp now owns the LNG facility. Hillcorp now owns all the production facilities out in the inlet. You're sort of stuck. And that's the issue that the RCA needs to address.
It's the vertical integration problem that we're talking about there, that when you own everything, you can call the plays as kind of how you want at that point. And that is the danger as it is for right now.
Yep.
All right, Brad Keithley, hope you feel better, my friend, and I hope you enjoy the concert tonight. We're all living vicariously through you, through your fun times. I hope you enjoy it. Martin Hayes, right? I'm going to have to go back and look him up and see what he has. Pure Drop. All right.
Martin Hayes, Pure Drop. Exactly.
Thanks, Brad. Appreciate it, my friend. Enjoy yourself. We'll see you next week.
Look forward to it, Michael.
Well, that's a wrap for another week's edition of the Weekly Top 3 from Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Thank you again for joining us. Remember that you can find past episodes on our YouTube, SoundCloud, Spotify, and Substack pages, and keep track of us during the week on Facebook and Twitter. This has been Brad Keithley, Managing Director of Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. We look forward to you joining us again next week for another edition of the Weekly Top 3.